pens and connections here. Oh, you'll be moving every day. I don't want them falling on me. That was amazing. That's an amazing story about God, who sees, who hears, who speaks into your situation. And I don't know if you can identify with Hagar in a desert on her own, totally on her own. Nobody else there, lost and wondering what's going on. And if you're a fella and you can't, I'm going to turn to another fella who's in prison, probably going through the same thing, because we're with Paul, who's in prison, and we're going through Philippians, and we don't know exactly when he wrote his letter, but he wrote it from prison. And if you think about prison, before I even read anything, prison is not a nice place to be. We read this story and we think, gosh, your prison, isn't it lovely? You kind of picture maybe an Irish prison, and he's his own cell, and he gets well fed, 3 square meals, and he's exercising in the yard, and he's a great time. Telly, you name it, all this stuff. And we sort of put this modern thing on it, but I haven't an idea what his prison was like, but I know it wasn't like that. But aside from that physical side of it, prison is a place of restriction. Prison is a place of isolation. Prison is a lonely place. A place where no one sees you. No one sees you. You're on your own. And all you're left with is thoughts in your head and the questions in your mind as to what am I doing here? How did I get here? And I don't know if anybody can identify with Hagar or Paul this morning, but if you can't, consider yourself blessed. Because we go through situations where we wonder, and we're like that. And yet, in this place, Paul experienced joy. And I don't really get my head around that at times, but I'm just going to read the passage. I got a lot of verses this week. I'm sorry, I didn't pick them. But I'm going to read through them because it's God's word. And I'm not going to try and touch on them all. But it says, Philippians 1:12, "Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely supposing that he can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, that what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now as always Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labour for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you in your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your boasting in Christ will abound on account of me. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them, for they shall be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you were going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now heard that I still have." I read it all because there's some verses in there that I like, and there's some verses in there that Paul made a mistake. He shouldn't have put them in at all, because they're terrible things to say to a Christian about suffering and all that sort of stuff. And we'd prefer if it wasn't in there. And I'm probably not going to touch on it all, but sure, that's life. But Paul's in prison, and it's a place of joy in his experience. And I think he was joyful because he lived with a perspective. He realized that his suffering was not meaningless, but God was at work in his suffering and through his suffering. It wasn't meaningless. We sometimes think this suffering is, we sometimes wonder, what is the purpose of all of this that I'm going through, have been through, may go through? What's going on? And sometimes it is meaningless, like having a cold or something, which I have. Or sometimes you're actually going through something, but it's doing something in your life. Paul says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. The Passion says, what has happened to me has not hindered what helped my ministry. I think that's amazing. What I'm going through has not had the effect of hindering me, but it has actually helped me. Much as I would hate to be going through what Paul went through, he could see that it did something positive. Because of my chains, and even the chains bit, who likes chains? It was prison though. Nobody wants to end up in prison, including Paul, because it's a place of restriction of your life and of your freedom. And Paul wanted to travel the world. Paul had this call from God and this gifting from God to travel the world and to preach the gospel to as many people as he could. And that's all he wanted to do. When he got up in the morning, all he thought about was, where am I going to preach today? What am I going to do? Who am I going to talk to? It was just in him. I don't identify with it, mind you, but it was in him. That's what he was called to do. That's not what happens when you're in prison. Can you imagine what it looked like when he was walking in the prison door, or whatever it's like, I don't know, thinking, this is not what I signed up for. This doesn't just do it. This is not preaching the gospel in the whole world. This is a little space with nobody. It's empty. It's pointless. It's meaningless. It doesn't make any sense. Yet still in that hindered place, it says Paul preached the gospel successfully and still lived out his purpose and his calling. There's a guy called William Barclay, he writes, Paul was a prisoner, but his imprisonment did not end his missionary activity. It actually expanded him and for others. The word Paul uses for an advancement of the gospel is a word used for the progress of an army or an expedition. The noun means to cut down in advance. The verb is used for cutting away the trees and the undergrowth and removing the barriers that would hinder the progress of an army. Paul's imprisonment, so far from shutting the door, opened the door to new spheres of work and activity into which he would never otherwise have penetrated. I think about cutting down and all that chopping through stuff, and you think about people who build roads, and people who clear gardens, and people who want to advance and take over. It's hard work, and it actually means getting in and digging up the ground and just clearing the path. If it's a path or if it's your garden. I often heard James talking about the little place he had across the road, and he'd be cutting down briars and he'd be opening up all this space. And I think you can't have space and you can't have all of this without actually cutting through something. And sometimes we want it to just open up in front of us, but we don't want to cut through. We don't want the physical hassle or the spiritual hassle or whatever it takes to get up and to actually cut through so that God's kingdom would advance. We just think it'll just happen. God's kingdom will advance. It doesn't say that. It'll advance when we move forward. It'll advance as we go through situations. It will advance, in Paul's case, as he stepped into a prison cell, which does not make any sense. But that's the way God worked, and that's the way God sometimes does things. And it doesn't always make sense. But we've got to see that God is actually at work, and God is advancing in things. It's amazing how God can work out his purposes despite our circumstances, and even through our circumstances. God can provide opportunities in every experience we go through. Every experience we go through, God can use, much as we don't like it. Even in Paul's ministry, he says it was advanced, but it was also advanced through other believers who looked at him and were inspired by his life to get up and to go out and to follow what is the call of every Christian, to talk about Jesus in whatever sphere or whatever area you can do that in. If or when we find ourselves hindered in our lives and in situations we never planned, expected or wanted, we need to remember that our God is always with us and he is never hindered. He is still the God in the desert when you feel alone. He is still the God who sees you when you feel alone. He is still the God who hears you, and he is still the God who speaks no matter what situation you find yourself in. Whether it's a prison or whether it's a palace, whether it's a nice place or whether it's not, whether it's raining or whether it's sunshine, God is still there. Can you recognize God at work in your life? Are you open to the possibility of God working in your tough situation? Are you looking, or can you see any opportunities in your situation? The greatest thing, I was worshipping there and I was thinking about it, and I thought, the greatest opportunity we have in every situation is to discover God in every situation. That's the greatest thing of all. We want the way out. We want all the answers. We want all our desires met. We want it all. And God promises to do all that. But God, first and foremost, wants you to know Him. He wants you to discover that, yes, He is El somebody, something. There's so many L's in the Bible of who God is. He is a God of so much. Sometimes He wants you, well, all the time, He wants you to discover who He is. We want to discover the answers, and God wants us to discover Him. Because He is really, if you get the giver, you get the gifts. If you get God, you get everything else that goes along with God. Are we open to having a deeper relationship with God, even through what we're going through? Or are we just trying to get out of it as quick as possible? When will I get paroled? When will I get out of here? When will I get the answers? When does this end? You know, so as I can move on to doing the real stuff. When this could be actually part of doing the real stuff and advancing in God's kingdom, whatever way that might be. God can turn every negative into a positive if we are willing to invite Him into our situation. We may not understand what God is doing in our lives. We may question what is going on. We may feel negative. But we need to understand that God is always good. God is always at work. And we just need to lift our eyes and see that. Because sometimes we're just sitting there thinking, how will I get out of here? What's going on? And that doesn't mean that we're happy in the situation. There's a difference, Daniel said it last week, between happiness and joy. There's a joy, there's something in the journey. There's a joy in the journey. A fellow wrote that, had a song called that once, of knowing God in the journey, of discovering God in the journey, and knowing that this journey has an end, because it does not go on forever. Paul says in verse 18, and because of this I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice because of this. He is choosing to rejoice in prison with chains on him. I don't understand it, but he is choosing to rejoice, I think, for two reasons. Firstly, the gospel is being preached. Now, it is being preached by people who are inspired by Paul, and it is also being preached by people who don't like Paul and who oppose Paul. There are people with pure motives, and there are people with selfish motives. Now, Paul isn't sitting there feeling sorry for himself, or getting annoyed, or thinking anything negative. He's actually rejoicing. He says, I don't care. God is being glorified. I don't care how it's been done. God is being glorified in my situation, and because of my situation, God is being made known. He didn't care who got the credit. He didn't care what other people thought about him. All he cared about was really what God thought. What does it matter, it says in verse 18. Now that's an attitude. What does it matter? I thought that's some attitude to have. You know, sometimes I have so many different attitudes, but what does it matter is not usually one of them at times. It doesn't really matter. It's all temporary. This is all temporary stuff in the light of eternity. And what these momentary trials that we're going through, or we might be going through, are nothing in the light of eternity. But sometimes all we see is the temporary, and we don't see it. Paul's goal is Christ, not himself. He is willing to give all, and he is willing to trust all to God. Can I see that whatever I face in life is so temporary in the light of eternity, and so small in the light of God's plan and glory? Second thing is, Paul is rejoicing in faith and hope for his future. What has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that. I eagerly expect and hope. He's not sitting there in despair thinking it's all over. This is the end. He's sitting there and he's thinking, I'm rejoicing because God has been preached, but I'm also rejoicing because I know this is not the end. This is not my final stop. This is not my life. My situation that I'm going through at the moment is not the complete sum total of my life. It's just one aspect, season, stage, call it what you want. Moment. And in the light of eternity, it's a tiny little moment. Paul knows that his life and his future is in the hands and control of God. Not the soldiers, not the empire, not even himself. It's in God's hands. This season will pass and give way to a better season. It's amazing that this prison season, which is a negative season, becomes a blessing to every Christian who has read about it since. Because of Paul's time in prison, we have this book. This probably is one of my favourite books in the New Testament, but that changes depending on what I'm reading. But of all books, I look to this book and I think, this is an amazing book. How can a guy write such a book from a place of prison? It's so inspiring. If you sit down and count all the joys and rejoicings and all the amazing teaching that's in it. And it all came out of a negative place. The worst place you would think, sitting in prison. What am I going to do in prison? I don't know what I'm going to do. Count the days. Put the markers on the wall. When do I get out of here? Paul's counting the pages. How much can I write? I read 18 verses there that seem to go on forever. And it's only half of the first chapter. Well, it's a lot of the first chapter. But there's so much in what Paul writes. There's a song I like, and it's a normal song. It's by Dermot Kennedy, and it says, "Better days are coming." And I take it as a prophetic sign sometimes. I know it's just a worldly song, but I think better days are coming. I actually like the song, and I do think you've got to realise that better days are coming. Because God is in charge of the better, and God is in charge of the days. And God is in charge of your life. So you can sing it, even if you don't like the song. It's a very good song, actually. To rejoice is to be cheerful, to be glad, to be happy. It means also to experience God's grace. Paul is experiencing God's grace in prison, where you wouldn't expect to be thinking and have it. I'll skip a few bits and I'll come to the end. I'll go on to the next section. Now as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. For to me to live is Christ. He is my source of joy, my reason to live. And to die is gain, for I will be with him in eternity. Now as always, the motive for Paul's life, his life's passion for every day he woke up, was to follow God, and nothing else mattered. So wherever Paul found himself, whether it was a good place or a bad place, and you read that in chapter 4, he just looked to God and he rejoiced in God. And he was thankful that he knew God. We're all going to die someday. That's the certainty of life. No matter what you think about it, that's just part of life. And we can't stop it. But every day we're alive, we get to choose whether we will follow God and glorify God, or whether we won't. We get to choose to live each day we're alive, because we don't know when the end is. And the life we live reveals what our reason for living is. It's seen by how we live. Our reason for living, our motive for living, or whatever it is seen by how we live. As it was for Paul. You could see how he lived, by the way he lived, and by what he wrote. Now, I am not Paul, thankfully. I am not a travelling missionary. I'm looking around for George, he's gone. Thankfully. I am not in prison, thankfully. I am not. Fill in the blank. It is important to know, more importantly, it is more important to know what you are as opposed to what you're not. What am I, first and foremost? How you answer that question will define your life. What are you first and foremost? Are you your job? Are you your possessions? Are you what? Bottom line for us is, I am a child of God. And all the other stuff is very important, but that has to be foundational. I am a child of God. It is important to know what you are rather than what you're not. What you have rather than what you do not have. Because you will rejoice more if you see it and understand what you have and who you are. This is a revelation that struck me. Myself and Joe Elvis were at an Elam conference a few weeks back, and this statement was one of my statements that I took away from it, and it's up there. I was born for now. I was born for now. God made each one of us for now. He didn't make us for 400 AD when Patrick was around, or from some other situation, 50 AD when Paul was around, or whatever it was. God made you for now. So God made you to live now. And God created you, and God sees you, and God knows your situation now. And God has also made now for you. Which is amazing. He made now so that you could fit into it. But he made you for now as well. I know it's a bit strange to get your head around it. But you were born for this time of life. This time of history. But history was also made to contain you because you fit into this time of history and this time of life. So you are important to this world just as much as this world is important to you and your situation now. And God created you. And it says in Psalm 139, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And all the days ordained for you were written before one of them came to be. So God knew when you were going to live. And God had, we say, a plan for your life. God had something for your life for now. And he wants you to do that now. He wants you to live now. Not in the future. The future is lovely. It's down the road. We have all these better days are coming. I know, yeah. It's good. And the past is gone. And I wish I'd been born in 19... No, I don't. Or 20... I don't. Because I was born now and I can't change it. So I can only live now in the knowledge that God sees me now. God hears me now. God is with me now, and God has something that he wants me to do now. So when Paul walked into prison, he said, this is not where I expected to be, but I'm here now, I might as well get on with it. And I might as well do what God wants me to do now. Not when I get out of prison, not in the future when I get to do my third missionary journey and go around the world wherever he can go, and he had all these longings to go places. But I'm going to live now, because now is all that I have. We have a call to follow God as disciples. We have a call to fulfill the purpose that he has for us now. And that comes out of having a relationship and knowing that you are a child of God. Nothing else. Yes, your job is part of what you do in life. Yes, where you live is part of you because it's part of you and it's part of your gifting and part of where you fit in, where you slot into now. But there's more to it than that. God has something that he wants to do through your life now. He wants to live through your life, just as he did with Paul, just as he did with Hagar. God never planned Ishmael. Never planned Ishmael. That was not part of God's plan. And yet, God says, I'm going to call him the God who hears. What? I didn't plan him, but I'm going to fit him into my plan. Because I knew he was coming anyway, because I know everything. But I didn't plan him. And God didn't plan everything as if we think that God has it all. You know, don't put me in prison, he's going to do that. Things happen in life. But God knows us in the things, and God can work things out for good in the situations. We have to know God. He's with us now. I'm going to skip to the end, because it's time to finish. Pages over. Do you identify with anything in Hagar's situation or Paul's situation? Prison situation, hindered situation, persecuted situation, trial or difficulty situation. If you do or you don't, have you asked God how he might use that situation for a greater purpose? How he might turn it out for good? Have you actually asked God, what does he think? You know, what does God want to do? We all know Romans 8:28. In all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. Have you asked him what's his purpose in this? Because sometimes all we want to do is escape and get away from it. And I put my hand up and say, yes, I don't like it. But what's God doing in it? Because God can always turn things out for good. He didn't plan Ishmael, and yet he turned it out for Hagar's good. And, well, it wasn't always good when you followed on the line, but anyways, he has a plan. He can turn things around. Do you believe that you were born for now in this time and in this place? Do you believe that you're not here by accident? Maybe ask God what he wants to do in your life in this situation instead of trying to escape it. Because he is always the God who sees, he is always the God who hears, and he is always the God who speaks. And all we need to do is connect with him and find out what he's doing. I'll hand over to worship, am I?